So in this video, I'm going to demo a project I worked on. It's basically, it wasn't a big project because most of the work was already done. Basically, what I wanted to do was use the emotive epoch EEG, which is basically a portable EEG you can buy online, a brain-computer interface, and use it to interact with my computer by pulling a data stream from it. And with that data stream, I could not only control anything, but not. I could basically control anything electronic, based on my thoughts. So that I thought it was pretty cool. So I bought one. The version I bought was one of the older versions, so it might have improved since then. So what I wanted to share was how I approached this, what worked and didn't work for me. And yeah, so let's get into it. I'll show you a demo of it working at the end of this, but for now I'll just explain what worked and didn't work. So thought training. I found thought training wasn't consistent. So basically what you can do is you can train the actual program to react to when you think of pushing, pulling, thinking left, right, up, down, about turning. For me, I don't know if this is because my brain's weird or what, but what I found was that whenever I took it off, I would have to retrain it because, and whenever I took it off and put it back on, I would have to retrain it because for some reason it wasn't reading my thoughts the same. Another thing I noticed is that as I added more movements for the emotive to detect, it got harder for it to detect it. So it was more likely to make mistakes. In the newer version, they replaced the SDK as use with an API called Cortex. I couldn't get a Cortex to work. It wouldn't detect my epoch, emotive epoch. Maybe it was because I have an older version. The SDK also I had difficulties with. For some reason, I couldn't. It had bugs in it. It like adding it and calling the code. It just had. I don't know if it was I was using it wrong or what, but I just couldn't. I've worked with other SDKs before without problems, but it just kept on saying missing dependency, even though I added the references. It wouldn't let me add DLLs to the project. It said it wasn't a valid DLL. So the SDK has been phased out in favor of the APIs, but yeah, that was my experience with the SDK. I'm not sure if I was downloading it from a faulty site. What did work was using the Emotives console application. So basically what I did is I built a C# program that would read the outputs of the console application, which basically detected things like blinking and looking left and right and stuff. And I parsed through the data feed and pulled the information I wanted. I'll show you how I did that in a moment, but I'll give you some examples of applications that this data feed could be used for that I thought of. One was communication. So if you're dealing with a paraplegic or someone that's partially paralyzed that could only blink, but they could control their blinking, you could, and they have the ability to learn, you could teach them like the alphabet and get them to the alphabet in Morse code or something, and then let them use their blinks in order to communicate on a screen. So it'll translate their blinks into letters, and then it would appear on a screen, so you would be able to understand what they were trying to communicate to you. Another thing you can do is use it to control a wheelchair. Like for example, Stephen Hawking, he's totally paralyzed. So you could use. I found blinks were the most accurate way to, and facial expressions were best detected by this. Thoughts were a bit iffy, but it was pretty good at reading the electrical pulses in your muscles. So you could use a combination of that in order to control a wheelchair. And you could use left-right views, blinking, facial expressions in order to make it move the way you wanted, even if you couldn't move the rest of your body. And you could use a certain combination of muscle movements in order to switch from controlling your exoskeleton or wheelchair to communication. Another thing you could do was control remotely devices. For example, if you have to do a lot of things and you want to control a drone or make a drone record for you or give a close-up of something you're looking at, you could do that. Or you can control vehicles in order to back them up precisely while looking at it from a different perspective outside of being inside it. In labs, if you're trying to do experiments and you can't get close to the chemicals because they're too dangerous, you could use mechanical arms and control it that way rather than using a keypad, if you wanted to. Army robots. So, if, for example, if you're in the army and you're going into a war zone, you could have a backup robot behind you that would follow you around and would shoot based on thought. So you wouldn't just be the only one shooting. So the enemy would have to think twice before messing with you because you had robots following you that will shoot at them, even if you don't, because you could just on thought they would attack. Robot toxin control. So if you're handling chemicals, but you don't want to handle them yourself, even though you're in the same room, you could have a robot go and grab it based on thought. Weapons control during flight. Sometimes a thought is faster than pushing a button. So if you're flying a plane and all your attention's on that and you see the enemy in front of you, you could just look at them and it'll shoot based on what you were thinking. Yeah, so those were a couple of applications that I thought of. So let me go and look at the code for now. I'll show you the code. So what I used was C#, small C# applications. Here what I'm doing is I'm actually storing the feed into a database. And what I'm doing here, this is my code to actually store, run a SQL command. So I'm actually looking at a database connector, which isn't relevant to us. But what I was doing with this program was actually storing the output of the Epoch console application in a database. So over here, what I did is I started the process to start the motion data logger, which basically tracks your eye movements and blinks. I'm redirecting the standard output into the program, and then I started the process. And every 10 seconds, what I'm doing is I'm getting a line from the program. So it's a thread. It'll sleep for every 10 microseconds. Actually, it's not every 10 seconds, I believe. And it'll do this indefinitely. So since it's a live feed, what it'll do is it'll get a line every 10 microseconds, and it'll detect whether that line says look left, look right, or if it's a blink. And then based on that, it's going to store in I have a store headset function or method. As we can see here, I just went to it, and basically what this does is store that output in the database. So yeah, now what I'll show you is it in action. So I'll pause it for a moment and set everything up.